Tullycarnet Library. Before we begin, who are you really?
Well, I can't tell you that. I'd have to move house again. But I'm from East Belfast. I've never been to Tullycarnet Library before. Ballyhack's my local. I've lived here all my life, and I grew up in the Bloomfield area. So actually, we used to use the mobile library, which did the rounds. Then at the top of a Bloomfield roundabout. So we used to go there every Tuesday or Thursday evening and fill my bag with books.
Fantastic. Because we are sitting in a library, can I also say this is my first in-person interview in a long time. I think we're talking February 2020, so I'm excited and in awe at the same time, and feel a little bit rusty. So bear with me.
Yes, and thanks to everyone who came out tonight.
Yeah, and thank you. It's wonderful to see everybody and everybody who'll be watching us online in this new hybrid world in which we exist. Okay, so we can't give away who you really are, but John Self is a moniker.
Yes. It comes from a Martin Amis novel called Money, and I used to. Well, I still am a fan of Martin Amis, but I used to be a big fan of Martin Amis about 25 years ago. And John Self is in the novel Money. He's a sort of a gluttonous figure. He's a money man. He's an addict of alcohol, food, junk food, pornography, absolutely everything. And
do you want to tell
so
us
he's
a
not
little bit more about your life?
Your
parents are here as well.
My parents are here as well. But I used that name because this was I kind of started doing it in the days before. Now that sort of Facebook, Instagram, and things like that, people use their real names generally. But this is in the days, for middle-aged men like me, before social media, whenever you used online forums and things like that. So you usually adopted a nickname, and that was the nickname that I chose. And then because I'd kind of acquired a certain following with that name, whenever I started writing for newspapers, they said, well, do you want to be John Self or Bleep Bleep? And I said, well, I don't know. They said, well, people kind of know you as John Self. Yeah. So I'm kind of stuck with it now, but it's okay.
Well, John Self is good, but it's not who he really is. You can ask his mum and dad later, but I think we'll keep it under wraps for the moment, for the safety of all concerned, because we'll talk about what writers, how they react to some of the reviews that you write. But you were a former lawyer.
Yes, I was.
And gave up this absolutely, what many would consider a good job 2 years ago.
A job your parents can be proud of.
2 years ago, just before the pandemic hit.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yes.
No regrets.
No. I mean, I'd been a solicitor lawyer for 20 odd years, and you get maybe it was a sort of midlife crisis or something. I don't know, but I just decided I'd been doing it because I mentioned earlier how I'd sort of been doing online forums, and then I developed a blog, which was no one does blogs anymore, but they did 12 years
ago.
Blogs
were big.
Blogs were big, yes. And so whenever I started doing book reviews part-time on the side, sort of maybe just 3 or 4 a year. And that was in 2011. So by the time that I decided that I was going to try to make a break for it, I kind of had some contacts and I sort of knew people, not an awful lot, but I developed a little bit of a sort of a following. Yeah. So I thought about it.
I think you're being a little bit self-deprecating. How many people were following you?
What do you mean on social media?
Yeah, but I mean, but you were known.
Yes, I mean, I'm sort of talking more about kind of people who could
pay you,
who could justify paying me. So literary editors.
They're important as well.
They're the ones, who so they kind of knew who I was.
Okay.
At that stage, and then if I was emailing them, not having done anything before, out of the blue, at least they would say, oh yes, well, I know your name, I know what you've done and what you can do.
The fact we're sitting in a library, and I have to mention this because I've got 2 hellions of teenage daughters at the moment who wouldn't thank me for even talking about them. But whenever they were much younger, the idea of joining a library was key. I got them booked in, signed up, whatever the word is, to the doctor, to the dentist, to the library, because that was something that was very much ingrained in me, and my own mother still, is a huge fan. I keep thinking that Foyle Street Library in Derry might actually shut completely if my mother didn't get in to get her weekly stash of books. And it were libraries, you mentioned the mobile library, but did that engender a love of reading? Where did you get that interest in?
Well, my parents always encouraged me to read, and they talk about how I used to, never mind books, I used to sort of creep up beside my dad on the armchair and read the newspaper with him, and things like that.
That's very annoying when you're trying to read the newspaper.
Yeah, I did go to the mobile library, and I'd never really thought of myself as a child as particularly bookish, or I was never. That wasn't how I define myself almost as a reader now, because it's my job. But I never really thought of myself as a book, as a particularly bookish child. But I did go to the library, and I used to read, all the sort of stuff that you go through, the famous five stuff, and the Roald Dahls, and I liked funny stuff, and then when I was a teenager, I would have started reading sort of Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett and that sort of thing, comic fantasy, science fiction. But it wasn't really until I kind of left school in my late teens that I started reading the sort of stuff, I suppose, that I read now and write about now, which is the kind of stuff that gets covered in newspapers.
So what is it then? Let's then just jump straight into being a critic. Oh, and by the way, if you have any questions, please put up your hand as we go along, rather than waiting for that formal kind of last 15 minutes, because I always worry that I ask the questions that you want to ask. So I will be scanning the room if you have any questions. Please don't do the usual staring at an imaginary piece of lint. In fact, there is one actually on my trousers. So being a critic, it sounds great. You get books sent to you every single day. You get these things called proof copies, where they haven't been properly edited yet. But do you ever sort of miss the wonder of being able to walk into a bookstore and get a book as a reader? Because it's like it's a job now, isn't it?
Yeah. That's definitely a factor, and it is nice to still. I still do go into bookshops and like
look at the price of that. I've got it free in the house.
Yeah, exactly. But the problem is, if I do buy a book now, I don't necessarily get a chance to read it, because all my reading is taken up with the new books. And so if I do have free time, I tend to go back to old books, old favourites, and reread stuff, or older books that aren't getting covered in the newspapers. But my books arrive every day. My wife, my long-suffering wife, puts up very much with the piles of books that go up in the hall, and then I clear them to some other space, and then more arrive. And it's like bailing out a leaky boat, or the reverse, actually, trying to bail out a leaky boat. It's lovely to get books, and it's lovely to get paid for doing something that you always like doing, and I still don't really believe on some level that people pay me just to write about books. Okay, so what's the day-to-day life of a book critic? Well, you have to read the book, obviously. Although actually, I say obviously, I think a lot of people suspect that you don't necessarily read the book, and I can only speak for myself and all my respected and esteemed colleagues. But you read the book because you have to. The one thing you don't want to be doing is you don't want to be kind of phoning it in, just writing something that's very generic, and because the way you get more work is by writing something that's interesting and entertaining, hopefully, and engages with the book so that people can tell. And one of the important things now, of course, is that whenever you write about a book, you have to. It has to be interesting, obviously, first and foremost. It's journalism. It's not a 5,000-word piece in the London Review of Books, or it's a 600-word thing in a general newspaper or magazine that people can flick past or scroll past, and you want to read it. But also, with everything being online these days, people are going to read a book and then maybe look for what someone's written about it. So they're going to be coming back. So you're going to be trying to appeal to people who haven't read the book, but also people who have read the book. Say something interesting about it for everyone. Right. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but you read the book, and then you kind of. The way I work is that I sit with my phone by my side and I jot notes down on the book as I read it on the notes app. Okay. And no, I don't write in the book.
I was just about to go, shock, horror.
Sorry.
He writes on the books.
Although if they're proof copies.
If they're proof copies,
because they're going in the recycling afterwards. But I make notes, and I do a lot of thinking about the book while I'm reading it. So I'll sometimes jot down a thought or a sentence. Do you lie in
a chaise longue?
No, I
don't.
Long,
whatever it is. Do you have your feet up? And
no, I sit in an uncomfortable dining room chair.
Do you?
to keep me alert. Well, some of the times do, because half the time I'm reading a page and then I'm distracted by Twitter or an email coming in or whatever, and you know, so I quite often don't read as or consistently as I should.
Yeah.
But I read the book.
And one book at a time? Or could you have
only
a
ever
couple
one
on the
book.
go?
No,
Right,
absolutely
okay.
never. Only ever one book at a time. And I make notes on it, and I maybe think of a sentence that I want to use in the review. And so by the time I've finished the book and made the notes, I've actually, in a way, kind of almost written it in my head in a way. And then it's just a question of getting down to the computer and pasting all the notes in. And if you find my technique is, if you find this how you want to start and how you want to end.
Yeah.
You just need to, I can't really start writing it until I know how I'm going to begin and know how I'm going to end.
Okay.
And then you just need to find the path from A to B.
Right.
If you're strong opening and strong closing is the key.
Strong closer is key, yes.
Yeah.
So if you literally hate the book, and I mean, many of us, I can't stop reading a book. I have to kind of get to the end, even if I detest it. I've never actually physically thrown a book across the room. Has anybody here done that? No? Julie, right, well, the librarian admits to throwing a book
Find out
across
which
the
one
room.
it was afterwards, Julie.
But do you, so you sit there and you go through it all, but do you, I've lost my train of thought now, so this is it, we've been back for the first time.
You were talking about throwing books across, so I take it you're going to ask me what happens if I don't like a book?
So
or?
if you don't like the book, how do you write a review which just doesn't have a couple of words which say, it's rubbish? How do you actually review it?
Well, first of all, I mean, if I think that when you start reading a book, and I'm supposed to be kind of impartial and somewhat objective, but at the same time, personal tastes always come into it. And Alan Bennett has this great line where he says that they should have a sign at the entrance to the National Gallery saying you don't have to like everything. Just because it's acknowledged as great or good, or even if you think you don't have to, it doesn't necessarily have to appeal to your personal taste. So although I'm trying to be impartial, obviously my personal tastes always come into it. Yeah. And it may well be that I'm just, a book just rubs me up the wrong way. And I think not that long after you start reading a book, the tree starts to tip one way or the other. And then sometimes if it's hard to make it tip the other way, for the author to make it tip the other way if you started to kind of go against it.
Sorry for the author now.
But, well, yeah. But, and sometimes, of course, if you've been forced to read a 500-page book and you start hating it at page 100, then maybe there may be a certain element of that coming out in what you write, sort of the resentment. But you've got to be professional, and you've got to, bear in mind the fact that the author probably spent months or more likely years on the book, and you're spending a few days with it.
Yes.
And therefore, you should probably give them the benefit of the doubt. So you do have to be fair to the author. But at the same time, there's a different approach which you're going to take depending on whether, for example, this is a debut novel by someone who's just starting out and someone who no one's ever heard of, and is it actually going to make an awful lot of difference, if you stick the boot in, or someone who's a very well-known household name who has got massive advances and lots of publicity and has turned in a real turkey that people are being asked to pay 20 quid for. Yeah. I did a review of a book by Edward St. Alban earlier this year, who writes these wonderful books about a man called Patrick Melrose, the Melrose Five. What's the 5 books? I don't know, a quintology or something. They were made into a TV series with Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah, and it's on the telly as well.
And they're wonderful, but he also writes, so those 5 books that he wrote are brilliant, and he's also written 5 other books which are all terrible. And it's a really bizarre dichotomy.
Does he do it under a moniker, or is it still?
No, it's still him. But the books about Patrick Melrose are very strongly based on his own life, so maybe just that's what's driving what makes it good. But so he published a new book this year, and I thought it was a real turkey, and I just kind of had to say so. And it was a bit of a hatchet job, which I don't often do. But
what
you've
did
got
you say?
I can't remember, to be honest, but it was 6 months ago.
You can't remember. Poor Edward's sitting, probably sitting still
I
crying.
think I said some.
Review.
I think I made some. Actually, on reflection, quite unkind comment about how at least J.D. Salinger had the decency to know when to stop publishing or something like that. But I mean, it was.
Burn.
But I think with someone who is well known, is a big name, has got broad shoulders and a big advance and lots of. They can take it,
So would this? Who were you writing this for? What?
The Times.
The Times. Okay.
And Private Eye said, even that nice John Self didn't like it. So
Even that
nice
well,
John
and you got to
Self.
mention in
I
the
gotta mention
Spectator, Private Eye, excellent. You also, you were described at the beginning as a book botherer. I do like that as a
That's my
as a
Twitter
description.
handle.
It's so good. Can you explain it?
Not really, no. I just wanted, what I wanted to do actually was, it's my Twitter handle, so it's John Self Book Botherer.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to, so that people knew, if they start following me on Twitter,
Yeah.
they know that they're just going to get lots of stuff about books.
Yes.
Because sometimes you tell a joke on Twitter and it gets a bit of a
Yeah.
following, and then
Yeah.
people start following you thinking you're going to tell them lots of good jokes. And I,
You've only got one
and I
joke.
think, yeah, I hope you like pictures of books on a parquet floor, because that's what you're going to get here. And links to paywalled reviews.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's book botherer, yes, or book jockey or something like that. Yeah, just
Okay. Book jockey?
yeah.
I've never heard that before.
You're kind of your yeah, the book is your whatever.
We're going to take a little bit of a breather. Well, I'm going to take a breather, but allow you to keep talking because you've brought a book with you.
Yep.
Because we were chatting and you were saying to me that the most recent thing that you're working on is rereading
Yep.
a book. Now, talk to me about the reason why you're doing this and what you get out, apart from it being for work and review, but what this idea is behind going back and rereading something.
So this is something I would say that about. I mean, obviously there are lots and lots of new books published every year. There are, I think, in the UK alone, it's well over 100,000 new books published every year, and that excludes your self-published Kindle and things like that. And there's a principle called Sturgeon's Law, which is named after Theodore Sturgeon, the science fiction writer, which is 90% of everything is crap. And so if 90% of new books coming out are crap, then sometimes it's nice to look at books that have been established not to be crap over the years, and maybe books
That have
withstood the test of time. So I think, I would say probably less than half, maybe about a third of the books that I review are older books. You don't get an awful lot of space for coverage for that sort of thing in the newspapers, but the London Times does a thing where they do a series called Rereading about old books, because it's all about, I mean, what authors, I talked about hatchet jobs a minute ago, but what readers really want, and this is what literary editors in newspapers have learned from the number of clicks they get. It used to be in print, they didn't know what people were reading and what they weren't reading. Now that it's all online, they can see what people want to read. And what they really are looking for, naturally enough, is book recommendations. So people want to see positive stuff. They want to find out what they want to read next. And there's nothing like talking about a book that you have read before and that you have a passion for and that you're rereading now. And also the Observer usually let me do stuff about reissued classics, and the Critic generally let me write what I want. So I get to cover that. So it's nice to be able to talk about a book that has not just the latest thing that all of the publicity machine is behind.
And there's a huge publicity machine.
And the reason that there's a huge publicity machine is because they paid £200,000 in advance and they need to try to recoup that. Whereas it may not necessarily be the greatest book in the world, surprise, surprise. Whereas there are older books that maybe people have forgotten about, but you probably get a lot more pleasure out of than the latest, bright young thing.
So what have you got?
So the book that I just filed this review yesterday, this is a book called Mrs. Bridge by Evan S. Connell, who's an American writer who died in 2013. And it's kind of like, if you think of sort of the great American novel, which we usually think of as those big sort of fat things by people like John Updike or Jonathan Franzen these days and stuff, and they're all very kind of self-satisfied and overstuffed and sort of, kind of showy offy. And this is less than 200 pages, tip to tail. But it kind of crams all of that stuff in a much more efficient way than those big, those sort of big boys do. So I wanted to ask the literary editor of the time said, I want you to do another rereading, what would you like to do? So I gave him a few titles and he said, why don't you do this one?
And tell me a little bit about the author.
So the author, Evan S. Kennedy, he's kind of like a bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for? Not Renaissance man, something like that. But he wrote poetry, he wrote novels, he wrote biographies, he wrote essays. He died a few years ago. He didn't really like to repeat himself, as that kind of suggests, but he did write another novel after this called Mr. Bridge, and those two novels together were filmed in 1990 as Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, starring Paul Newman and Joanna Woodward, husband and wife, of course, and they played. So the book's kind of got a little bit of attention at that stage, but it's kind of about a woman who, in the 1930s and 1940s in America, is she's trying to, I suppose, be as respectable as possible, and is kind of struggling to conceal the fact that she's not really that happy with having a husband who's out at the office all day, and with her children who are growing away from her. And she keeps on saying, is this daughter mine? I don't even understand my children anymore. And, you know, as a father of a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, like, I can kind of see where that's going.
Have they read my mind?
Well, exactly,
yeah.
and that's the whole beauty of it, isn't it, of course, because although this is someone who was, you know, a book written by a man who's now dead about a woman who lived, or in imagination, the book was published in 1959, by the way, so it's quite an old book.
Yeah. But it feels very contemporary.
But it feels very contemporary because it's about those sort of things, you know, about, you know, it's not about big issues like, you know, war or, you know, famine or great world events. It's about just ordinary suburban life and how people can kind of navigate that.
So that's been filed. So filed means that's been sent. Has it been published yet?
No, I've got another one in the pipeline for that, so it'll probably go in a couple of weeks' time.
So you sit then with the book. Interestingly, you've read it before. So
yes.
How long ago did you read it?
About 10 years ago.
And that would have been, you were a younger man, pre-kids, or kids very young. So the person, I love this whole idea about rereading, because you're a different person coming to just to cut across, when I stopped reading The Golden Notebook, Doris Lessing's Golden Notebook, and I put this I had a page marker, which actually is really bad because you clip it into the book and it kind of destroyed the top of the page. Anyway, it's still sitting there because I thought, I don't want to read this because I don't understand what's going on, and I want to read this when I think maybe I was deferring and giving myself an excuse. I'll read this when I'm older. Now, I haven't gone back to it, so that'll be that's what I'm going to have to do. But there are books that you think, oh, I don't like this, but then you come to it later, and because you've got 10 more years of wisdom or life learned, the book appears differently to you. Yeah,
I mean, one of my favourite books is a novel by Joseph Heller, who's, I guess, one of those great American authors, best known for Catch-22, but my favourite novel is his second one, Something Happened, which is actually kind of similar to this one, and it's about that sort of, you know, malaise of everyday life. Yeah. And I read it 4 times, and the first time I read it, I was in my teens, and I found it kind of a bit of a slog, but I sort of couldn't kind of stop reading it. It was very intense. And then the next time I read it, I found it very funny. And then the next time I read it, because it was the same age as or close to the same age as the protagonist, I found it really quite depressing. But you know, different in each way, but equally interesting each time.
And does that come across so when you then go to review a book, are you saying, well, I'm coming to this for a second time? How much do you put of yourself? In that one,
I didn't. The previous one I did for the Times rereading, I kind of did, because it was a book about memory, and it was a book that I read when I was a student, and I kind of talked about how, you know, it was much more about me, as much about me as the book, because I just wanted to do it that way. But this one, actually, I had reviewed this on my blog 10 years ago, and I didn't look again at the review on my blog when I was writing the one I did this week. So I'm going to look back maybe after it and see how different my view was and how my approach was, and did I think the same lines were great, and did I think the same things about the book? I don't know.
You could revisit the book every decade.
Yes. Okay,
well, that's just a plan in my head for you. I'm sure you've got other thoughts for your future career, but maybe in a decade we'll talk about Mrs. Bridge again.
Third time, yep.
Anybody got any thoughts or questions? Yes, lady in the front row.
Hi, John. Two simple questions, really. How much time do you set yourself time on a daily basis, weekly basis? You know, how do you prioritise? And obviously, with your previous role as solicitor lawyer, do you find that's helped? You know, are you more? I don't mean a speed reader, but if you've got all these books and you have to and give them the due diligence by reading them all. You know.
Yeah. I'm just going to repeat that.
I was going to repeat that,
but just for the benefit of online people who may not be able to hear you.
So, if I could just say what you have said, is that you ask how much time does John give to reading, and secondly, does his past life as a solicitor lawyer not so much be a speed reader, but gives him, I love the use of the phrase due diligence, when he approaches reading books. I'm sure it's much more exciting than tort law, but
or contract,
so basically, how much time, and did your past life help you?
Well, how much time? I mean, I suppose as long as the book needs. I do read fairly quickly. Just my natural instinct is to read fairly quickly. But I also, I mean, I work from home. My wife works part-time. I've got 2 boys who need to be dropped off to school and picked up, so that kind of limits the amount of time that I can spend each day actually working. But I think one of the things when I left my old job was to not spend so much not work for such long hours, and now I probably don't work for such long hours, but it's a little bit more scattered in terms of, I'll be reading stuff at in the weekend or the evening, which is for work, and so I kind of try to cut down on that, but it is quite difficult to sort of demarcate when you're doing your hobby as a job. It's quite hard to separate work from non-work time, which is a bit of a challenge, and then you have to kind of remember all the admin side of things, like pitching stuff to editors and doing all that. The second point about the lawyer, I think it's not so much a speed reading thing, but actually there's not that much difference. I was a litigator, so doing disputes and stuff like that. And it's actually, I don't think there's necessarily that much difference between the 2 jobs, because they're both kind of about the art of persuasion. You're trying to tell a story and you're trying to persuade someone about something, get from one point to the next. So actually I think there's kind of, I probably have some skills that I learned and picked up. And also just in terms of being a self-employed person who I'm entirely reliant on myself now. Being a lawyer, certainly it taught me a lot, I think, of professionalism, which, in terms of just making sure everything is done to the best standard it can be, and making sure that I file my stuff on time within the word count and as clean as it can be for the editor, so that it's, so that they want to make their job as easy as possible, just as anyone wants to make their boss's job as easy as possible.
Be organised, yeah.
Yes, be organised, exactly.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Hiya.
No, I'll come to you in a second, yeah.
When you mentioned you reviewed a book and you didn't like it or you lambasted it, does that person send you more books or other books, or do they ever come back and say, why did you write that?
Yeah, so this was a
Or any,
question.
I know it's constructive criticism,
Mhm.
would they ever get back to you to say, I take on board what you've said, or does it work like that?
Okay, for the people watching online, because I was going to come to that. Basically, you're asking, has anybody who you've reviewed basically come back to you? Have they appreciated constructive criticism if it's been negative, or
Do they send you more
or do
books?
they send you more
Well,
books? And yeah,
I suppose the first thing to say is that the people who send me books aren't the authors, it's
Yeah.
the publishers.
it's the publishers. Yeah.
So, the publishers, that book that I gave a hatchet job, if you like, to.
Edward.
Yes.
Yeah. If you're watching, Edward,
Yeah,
we
he
feel
won't
your
be.
pain.
He's got more important things to do.
I don't know.
But I think for the same publisher or from the same publishing group, the next book that I reviewed from them was a rave, where I said it was one of the best books of the year. So, I don't do that deliberately, but it swings and roundabouts. And I think they understand that, they put a book out there, and although they're paid to say it's a wonderful book, they probably know it's not as well. So, that's, I rely on publishers to send me books, but if they said, well, I'm not going to send him books anymore because he gave it, I'll just get them from the newspaper anyway. They'll send it to me instead.
But in a way, though, if you have done not a hatchet job, but if it has been constructive,
A courteous,
constructive
but meaning-
criticism,
yeah.
and it's got further traction. So, for example, you said that was it this Private Eye mentioned it.
Yeah.
You can't pay for publicity like that in many ways. It's not going to, maybe he'll lose a few book sales, but he's a big enough writer that people will still go to it. From my point of view, it's if you were doing that, would you do that to a debut author? Would you have that sense of kind of decency?
I've never handed a book back and said, look, I don't like this book, but if it was by a debut author, and no one else was covering the book, and there's a question, you could say, well, what's the point of me taking up valuable space in a newspaper page or a website to say this is a book you've never heard of and it's no good,
So would you turn it down then? You'd say no?
Not necessarily, but I might say, well, do you want maybe 300 words in this instead of 600, and we'll cover something else as
You
well.
negotiate
Because,
around it.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it doesn't often happen, to be honest, because, usually the books that I review, it's a collaborative thing between me and the editor, so I'm choosing something maybe I've already had a look at home, and I know, well, it looks interesting, so it doesn't happen that often.
Okay. Are you happy with that?
So I suppose the other part of that question was about authors, and authors. I've never had an author come to me and complain about a review.
You haven't been biffed on the nose.
I've not been biffed in the nose or
anything,
doorstepped, as some people do. That probably helps living in a different landmass than most of them, you know. But I do occasionally get contact, like an email from an author whose book I've praised.
Oh, right, okay.
Saying, thank you very much. You know, I guess they get my email probably from the publisher. You know, and one author a few months ago said, oh, you know, you really saw things in the book that other people didn't and stuff. And that's nice to hear.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the review isn't for them. And it's, you know, you have to be wary of maybe that they're trying to ingratiate themselves with you, you know, so you'll give the next book a nice review. And also, whenever they put the book out into the world, it's not their book anymore. You know, it's what they intended to do with it isn't really relevant. It's what they did do with it and what people see in it. So, you know, it's nice for an author to say, yes, oh, thanks very much. You know, I really thought you really nailed it with that. But it's not really important.
I'll come to you in just a moment, but I'm just thinking of, I do a lot of theatre, and you know, like the guy who was called, was it Frank? Oh, he was called the Butcher of Broadway. Would you have a name like that for yourself?
No, definitely not. No, I mean, I don't think.
The Terror of Tullycarnet.
I mean, we were talking earlier, and the thing that I get mostly is people saying, "Oh, my bank manager hates you," or "My wife or husband or whatever hates you because you always, you know, make me always buy books." So people definitely follow me because they want, they want recommendations, you know, and that's what I do. You know, I'd much rather.
They hate you for other reasons,
I'd
not
much,
for
that's
quite a nice one.
I'd much rather, you know, be ringing the bell about a book than telling people not to. But just sorry, one other point has occurred to me about, and maybe you're going to come to this anyway, but authors. I have, however, been introduced to authors who have read what I've written about them. So I was at I don't get, because well, obviously with the pandemic, but also living in Belfast and most of these things happen in London, I don't get to them that often, but occasionally I go to like a prize do or something like that. And I was introduced to 2 authors at one of them. This was about 10 years ago, so before I was even doing it full time. And they were both Booker Prize winning authors, so big names, you know, prominent people.
You're not going to tell us who.
I'm not going to tell you. I was introduced to them each, and the first thing that she said to me was, "Oh, finally you liked one of my books." And the interesting thing was that
and that's a Booker Prize winning author.
That's a Booker Prize winning
okay,
author.
Right.
And I said, well, I liked the previous one. Oh, well, ish, you know. Okay. And obviously she'd read, and the other one who was with his wife, whenever I was introduced, oh, this is John Self, you know, he writes about books, and he turned to his wife, he said, oh, we've blown hot and cold on you. Because true enough, I had liked some of his books and hadn't liked some of the other ones. But the point was,
they all read their reviews.
Well, not only did they all read their reviews, but this was before I was doing it full time, and these were, first of all, one of them was on a blog, my blog, which I ran for sort of 10 years or so, and the other one wasn't even on a blog, it was on a forum, which I discussed books with other people. So obviously these people were delving quite deep into the internet to find what people were saying. Well, authors essentially, you know, sitting at a desk all day, having nothing better to do than you know, Google themselves and you know, and tie themselves up in knots, of course, because they can't resist scratching that itch of finding out what bad things. And they only ever remember the bad things. They do. Of course.
I know. It must be awful because you know, you spend how many years. Blood, sweat and tears and something, and then it goes out into the world.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, if I was an author, I'd probably feel exactly the same way.
Gentlemen.
Sorry.
Yes, I'm just wondering, are there any books that are universally considered classics in modern fiction that you absolutely hate? And, would you have the courage to name them, or would you have the courage to critique them?
Okay, so books, that's just for the people online. Are there books that are universally acclaimed as classics, but that you don't like?
Oh, well.
And will you name them?
I might have to think about that and come back to it at the end. But I mean, in terms of classics as opposed to modern books that are universally, I mean, the Alan Bennett line applies. You know, you don't have to like everything. I mean, I never could get on with Wuthering Heights. I don't really like Dickens. Sorry.
Sorry.
I remember saying, what Dickens should I read? And someone said Great Expectations and Bleak House, and I tried them both and I didn't really like them. You know, but you know, that's fine. Modern stuff, I mean, Maggie O'Farrell wrote a novel last year called Hamlet, which absolutely everyone seemed to love. I reviewed it reasonably warmly in the Irish Times, but I did have some sort of criticisms of it, and and there's this kind of reactive thing that you get where the more other people kind of ballyhoo a book and go, oh, how wonderful it is, and where you think, well, actually, I didn't really, you start to almost,
Doubt yourself?
even though I quite liked it, you start to think, actually, I didn't like it, because in response to other people liking it, in your view, too much.
Yeah.
But it's all a personal taste thing. I'll see if I can think of any more. But, I mean, my job is kind of to say what I think about books, so I've no qualms about that. But
And are there specific genres of books that you do? I mean, would you do crime fiction? Would you do romance?
I don't really do that, partly because, I mean, the question that sometimes comes up is about coverage of books and what books get covered in newspapers, and generally crime, genre stuff like crime, science fiction, thrillers, romance, they tend to get parcelled up into sort of roundups. So the Guardian and the Times will have their own specialist reviewers for those genres, and they'll do maybe 5 books in a little block, shorter reviews.
Right.
And so the books that get, I tend not to do that, so I tend to do full reviews, and that tends to be, what's termed literary fiction, or stuff in translation or stuff like that. And newspapers are always interested in this. People say, well, why don't you cover more popular stuff, or why don't you review what's on the bestseller list? And usually that's for the editors to say, but usually what they're interested in is what their readers want to find out about, what their readers want to read. So they're entirely driven by what the readers want. So the Times might be more interested in different books than the Observer, but no, I don't really do genre stuff. I do the sort of literary fiction.
And then the different newspaper editors. So you would have how many on the go? You've got the Irish Times. You've got the Spectator.
Yep.
You've got
Times.
The Times.
The Guardian, Observer.
Well, the Guardian and the Observer, are they the same?
They're editorially separate.
Editorially separate. Okay.
Same website, but editorially
separate.
separate.
So you could be sitting with maybe on a given day, say 6 or 7 different editorial teams.
Yeah.
And and they could all want 6 different books.
Or sometimes they want the same book, and I have to say no to one of them because one of them has asked me to do it already. But yeah, I mean, they all like, and if I'm pitching, an editor might come to me and say, well, what do you want to review? And I'll think about their newspaper and their readership and what they might want to read. And then one day I did 4 books for one paper and 4 books, and there were 8 different books, because I knew the readership would have different interests, but they're all stuff that I wanted to talk about. So.
And then the Irish Times, being on this island,
Yep.
Are they looking at, are they favouring Irish authors more so?
Not necessarily. I mean, they cover, the literary editor of the Irish Times, a guy called Martin Doyle, and the Irish Times has got a really good books coverage, and they cover a lot of books, and they do more Irish fiction, I guess, than other papers, but they're not special. I mean, he does a lot of international fiction, a lot of interviews for him as well. So, no, I mean, they're not necessarily that driven by. Obviously, they'll cover, things that are published by local presses that aren't being covered in the UK. But other than that, I mean, they've got a pretty broad range. So.
And then, do you find yourself? I mean, I like you get a lot of books sent to me, and there are a lot of new authors out there, and I find as well that the publicity machine is always giving you the kind of the headline. If you open it, and there's always a press release with it, and it's the latest twisty thriller seems to be the big thing at the moment.
Yep.
And they say the new Gone Girl or
Yes.
the new, and they're desperate to put things into sort of areas that people can quite quickly hook on to. But you don't go down that line at all. Explain what you mean by literary fiction, because I do think it's unfair that, I mean, I know that there's an awful lot of crime fiction that comes out of Northern Ireland as well, but it seems to be that they'll, as you say, they'll just put it into a roundup.
Yep.
Whereas in many ways, a lot of these books are really brilliant and could stand alone by themselves. What is it? Explain the literary fiction versus kind of everything else.
Well, it's almost like a what's left if you take all the other genre stuff out.
Yeah.
But
But
it's
they've got a
generally
very
stuff that's,
big. They've got a very inflated sense of self.
Yeah,
I keep
and-
using the
and-
word self tonight.
And there's, it's the kind of stuff that, remember when Eason's has gone from Northern Ireland now, but I remember back in the day, Eason's used to file literary fiction under what they call discerning novels, which was kind of like a very value-laden categorization.
As if you went over to the crime
Yeah.
fiction section, like you literally had no discernment
Yeah.
when it came to what was proper reading.
Discerning novels.
Yeah.
So, and I guess there is maybe a certain sense of that kind of, self importance, and, and that carries through to publishers as well, who will probably not submit that crime novel for the Booker Prize, but they'll submit some maybe slightly plotless narrative about, someone standing at their kitchen window looking out and thinking about the past.
Yeah.
So it's, I guess it's all part of it's almost as much part of marketing as it is of literature,
Yeah.
In some ways, I would quite like it if bookshops just put all the books on A to Z from all categories and genres.
agree.
And didn't actually, because I don't often go into the crime section. I do sometimes because there's some crime writers I like, but or science fiction. But if it was all just put together, then we'd probably all find a lot more that we liked.
It
we didn't
is,
know we
it's the
liked.
categorizing.
And then you've got people like Margaret Atwood or Kazuo Ishiguro who write science fiction,
Yeah.
but it's not categorized as such because if it was put in that shelf or given a shiny spaceship on the cover, then it would put off, they think it would put off the readers that they're trying to attract, but they're also potentially losing readers that they might gain.
Are you also pushed into for example, when, I would get emails about, so-and-so's been longlisted for such and such a prize. And then you think, oh God, because you're going to get the inevitable, and so-and-so's been shortlisted. And then you think, when is this ceremony ever going to happen? And you realize it's not happening for another 2 months. And it's this kind of drive to make you interested in something. And then when they win, if they get the big stamp of, Booker Prize winner or, Orange Prize for fiction, all of that when it goes on the front. And then in a way, we're all told that we must read this novel. I actually become really thran, for want of for anybody watching online, just can't be, how will I describe thran?
Stubborn.
Stubborn, right. And say, I'm not going to read that now until everything dies down. That, working in the media, I have to. But there is almost do you get a sense of thranness sometimes, thinking, I'm not going to be told what is current to read?
Sort of, but I do sort of, well, on the one hand, it's all marketing. The Booker Prize, if I remember rightly, was set up in part by the Book Marketing Council. It was a main it was a drive to promote literary fiction, and that's what it is. It is a marketing exercise. But I quite like prizes and shortlists because they're a way of recommending books to people, and they're, I've never been on a prize jury, but I'm sure the judges do their best to try to find the books that are worthwhile, and it's a good way to get. I think ignore the winner, but always look at the shortlists, because what we know from talking to or from hearing prize judges is that the winner tends to be the result of a lot of horse trading, and maybe if two people like one book and two people like another book, well, neither of those books is going to win, but we'll let this compromise one win. So, but the shortlists are usually pretty reliable. This year's Booker shortlist I think is very good from the four that I've read on it. So I don't necessarily share that thran quality, Marie-Louise, but so I do quite like prize lists as a way of getting books, brought to people's attention. That the Booker Prize shortlist this year, there's a book on it called The Promise by Damon Gallagher, which has got, I said in my review, that it's such, I said in my review that the book is so good that the publishers have given it a terrible cover to give other books a chance. Because, if you actually looked at that book, it looks like a misery memoir with this sort of child in tears on the front and this awful sort of graphic. And, but the Booker Prize shortlisting has, helped people realize that actually it's a book worth reading.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, lady in the front row.
First of all, I must apologise for being late.
That's okay.
I obviously got the time wrong. I was aiming for 7, but I think it should
You didn't miss much.
You can watch it back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I've never got a definition that I have understood about what is a literary novel
Yeah.
as opposed to a novel.
Yep.
Can you define it for me?
Okay, so the lady is, for anybody who's watching online, is apologising first of all for arriving half an hour late. You did a lovely bow whenever you came in, so thank you very much. And I'm saying that you can catch up on this later because it will be online. You want to know you've never really got, and this is kind of what I was digging at as well, you've never got a proper definition of what a literary novel is as opposed to a novel.
So I think, well, again, it's as much a marketing category, I think, as anything else. You know, it's people who think they like literary novels will have this marketed to them, and it'll be designed in a certain way and sold in a certain way. But I think there is maybe a bit more to it, which is that I said what I said to Marie-Louise earlier when she touched on this point, was that if you take the genre stuff away, but if you look at a genre, if you look at a crime novel, there has to be a crime in it. If you look at a science fiction, there has to be some kind of, you know, theoretical, technological development which enables change to take place to humanity. If you look at fantasy, there has to be otherworldly elements to it. So I suppose you could categorize it as something that excludes all of those things, that it's a novel that doesn't have any kind of, or doesn't necessarily have any of those elements in it. And also, Anthony Burgess talked about A novels and B novels. So A novels are ones that are, well, B novels are ones that are driven by plot and sort of, you know, sort of page-turning capability, and A's are much more about language and sort of trying to make you linger on the page rather than turn the page. So maybe the literary novel is more like an A-type novel than a B-type novel. You know, where it's not sort of trying to, it's more about the journey than the destination. But it is, you know, it is a troublesome category, and it is I think as much a sort of a marketing thing. So. I think there probably is a type of snobbery.
This is asking, is there a type of snobbery to it? Yeah.
I think there probably is. And, you know, people every year complain about genre fiction not being shortlisted for major prizes. And, of course, genre fiction has its own genre prizes, but then that maybe feels like they feel like it's being ghettoized in that sense. And that is as much, again, to do with expectations, because it's self-perpetuating in a way, because on the one hand, publishers can only submit one book to the Booker Prize every year, so they are not going to submit a novel that they think isn't going to win if it's a crime novel or if it's a science fiction novel. But also the judges, given that the Booker Prize is defined as a prize for literary fiction, the Booker Committee is going to choose judges that they think will like literary novels, so it's kind of self-perpetuating as well. And I suspect that given that the Booker Prize is the most prominent prize, there is a certain amount of of self-satisfaction about that, and you know, sort of kind of protecting its own I don't know, demarcation or market. Yeah. So yeah, is there an element of snobbery about it? Yes. Although I suppose we all like our own genres, and maybe there's an element of, you know, snobbery in people saying, well, I prefer my genre to literary fiction.
But it's a good question. Thank you.
And I have to say, I have yet to, having struggled through several Booker Prize winners, I've yet to find one that I really enjoyed.
Well,
actually, the lady has just dissed all the Booker Prize.
Well, she tried some Booker Prize winners. Last year's Shuggie Bain was a bit of a page turner. It's a very tragic story, but it's kind of interesting.
I find that there are days I can't actually read tragedy at all, and then there's days that I enjoy the crime fiction genre because it allows you to just enter into a specific period of time. It just depends on the mood almost that you're in.
There's one thing that also comes to mind when you talk about Booker Prize winners, which is that we very rarely get funny books shortlisted for prizes. You know, and it tends to be, I mean, last year's Booker Prize shortlist was, you know, very miserable, you know, about sort of slavery and rape and all sorts of things. There's not much joy in Booker Prizes winners, I'll grant you that.
Lady at the back.
Just you mentioned earlier on that you don't write the reviews. You don't write them for the authors. You write them for
Yes.
people to
Yeah.
So from that aspect, do you ever actually have people who would disagree? You know, the people that you're writing reviews for, you know, the public?
Oh yes, I mean.
Come back to you and say, oh no, totally disagree with you. Thought that bit was terrible, or.
Oh yeah, I mean.
Let me just say what that question is.
Course.
So you're asking, you're referring to something that John said earlier about that he doesn't write the reviews for the authors, he writes them for the general public or for the readers. And you're asking, has anybody from that, any readers come back to you and said, you got it completely wrong, or you got it completely right?
They don't often say it directly to me, but with everything going online now, there's usually a space, what they call below the line, for people to comment. Not all papers did. The Guardian have stopped doing it, but the Observer still does it and the Times still does it. So, I mean, I reviewed a book for the Times a couple of months ago where I quoted a line, the opening line, which I thought was a really good sort of juicy way to open the book, you know, and really get people reading. And the first comment below the line was, well, that put me right off. And then there was another one that I reviewed for the Observer, and they basically said, oh, you completely misinterpreted this aspect of the book. And maybe I did, you know, nobody's perfect. It is a personal interpretation, but you have a certain amount of professional pride. So I was slightly wounded by that. And, you know, especially since I think they were probably right.
Yeah.
So people do disagree, but that's fine, you know. I mean, I mean, I don't really have any qualifications for what I do, except that I like reading and I like writing. So there's no reason why my opinion should be any more valuable than anyone else's, except that I hopefully can express it well, and I've read a lot, so I know kind of how books fit in their context and things like that.
Another thing that I wanted to ask is that I sometimes worry that and I'm equally compliant in this, that the media can almost act as a little bit of an echo chamber, and we all know the books that should be talked about and the books that we want to be seen to be talking about and the authors that we want to be seen to be interviewing. Do you find that, because you mentioned earlier on like something 100,000 books are published every year, and some of them are self-published as well, and for a long time that was called vanity publishing.
Well, that's different. Vanity publisher, you pay a firm to publish your book for you.
But now that people can self-publish, would you seek out those books as well? Would you seek out books that are put up on Kindle, or are you going for the same kind of books that are being sent to a lot of different people who work in that media?
I mean, well, short answer to those questions is no and yes. But I mean, no, I don't seek out self-published books. I have read self-published books in the past, and the problem is, I'm quite sure there are lots of really good self-published books out there. The problem is finding them, because you know they don't have that. They're all on a level playing field, and they don't have that.
The publishing house.
The publishing house kind of whittling them down. Now, obviously, publishing houses whittle them down to, you know, not necessarily in a perfect way. They may be just looking for, you talked about, you know, a follow-up to the last big success of the last season. They might be publishing 5 more of those. Or they may be just looking for things that are, you know, are going to sell hundreds of thousands of copies rather than something that's breaking new ground and doing interesting things. But they do provide some service in terms of whittling down at least, you know, it's going to be spelt properly, it's going to be edited properly, and it's going to be, you know, hopefully coherent and not always, but you know, it'll be if a certain benchmark will have been reached, if it's been through an agent, through a publisher, through, you know, acquisition, and you know, at least you'll know it's at a certain level. And even then, you know, lots of the books that I get, I don't like or I'm not interested in. So,
would you ever take a punt? I'm not saying that anybody's going to do this tonight, but if somebody rocked up to you and said, "I've written this," would you recoil in horror, or would you? I mean, you would be very polite. I know, and you strike me as a polite man. But would you take the book and would you read it?
I would take it. Well, I mean, I would probably look at it in the same way that I look at the start of lots of books that get sent to me, you know. And I'm certainly not of the view that a book has to grab you in the first page, but you can probably tell quite a lot by the first few pages of whether or not it's something that's going to be, you know, of the kind of thing that you're interested in, or if it's well written enough, or to at least hold your attention.
Is there a regret at all about a book that you've, no, I was going to say savaged, but if you have criticised it quite robustly, and then the book has actually, you know, changed, or the opinion of the book has changed? Has that ever happened to you where you've actually thought, well, maybe that review wasn't quite right? Or do you stand by all your reviews?
Well, I stand by them, and they're the best expression of what I thought when I read it. But I guess it's that thing about, you know, experiencing things differently as time passes, you know, and, you know, I'm sure there are books that I could read now and maybe not like that I liked 10 years ago, or books that I would like now, or you know, would like, not would like now that I didn't like 10 years ago. So I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are some.
Lady in the front row.
I would just like to ask John, are you influenced therefore then by publishers? So if a very highly regarded publisher? So you think, right, I must review this.
Yes,
Okay,
I am.
does it-
Also, when
yeah.
you're looking at the
Sorry,
title,
Yeah.
sorry, Marie-Louise,
So the question is that are you influenced by publishers? So if a very highly regarded publishing house sends you the proof copy or a review copy along with marketing information, would that sway you over what?
over something that,
Yeah.
just another
Yeah.
publishing house.
Yeah,
rather
over
than
another
just
publishing
over
house.
this.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, yes, I am.
It's very hard not to. It is
because-
very seductive. It is very
But
seductive.
not in a, I mean, well, obviously, and that's limiting in a way,
Yeah.
obviously, by definition. But at the same time, you mean, for example, so there are two ways of answering that. The first is the publishing house themselves, which is, so there are some publishing houses that I think do interesting stuff, and I want to, I'm more likely to at least look at their books because of like books they've published in the past, or think, well, maybe they've got a sensibility that chimes with what I like. People like Penguin Modern Classics or NYRB or Pushkin Press or people like that, and others. But then also, because I've been around the publishing world for quite a while, I sometimes know publishers individually. And so there's one publisher called Philip Gwynne Jones who published lots of authors, who was the first person to publish lots of authors I really like. So if he sent me a book with a personal note saying, I think you'll like this one, I'll probably be more likely to read it than I am another book sent by with a generic press release that I haven't seen. So yes, I mean, and obviously that limits me discovering stuff from publishers maybe that I haven't tried before, but I do try to do that, but there's only so many hours in the day.
One more question. Yep.
Just a very quick question, John. You have a certain turn of phrase, I love reading what you write. Is it always going to be journalism, or do you think we would ever see a novel by John?
Okay, so the last question of this evening, saying that she really likes your turn of phrase, but will it always be journalism? Will it always be reviews of other people's books, or does John Self have a novel in him?
I don't think I have a novel in me.
A wee poem?
No. I think part of the problem is we know all the genres. I think part of the problem is that maybe one of the reasons that I write book reviews is because I'm not very good at making things up. So if you're writing a book review, you've got your raw material already. And one of the things, in terms of one of the things I'm not very good at as a journalist, or in terms of as well as book reviews, I write interviews and features. I'm not very good at coming up with ideas for features. But people will come to me and say, would you write this feature about such and such? And I'll go, yeah, of course I will. I'll do a good job, what I hope. Maybe it is. That's the lawyer, some said. So no, I don't think there is a novel in me. Is there a book in me? I don't know. Maybe a book about tweets from the touchline, or a book about, I don't know. Who knows? But I don't.
I think you need to dish the dirt
I've got
on
no
all the
plans.
negative, on the reviews.
I've got no plans for one. I do want to come back because I've been distracted thinking about this gentleman's question about books that other people have liked that I didn't like. There was
Classics,
a book, well, not necessarily classic, but modern. I mean, there was a book shortlisted for the Booker Prize last year called Real Life by a man called Brandon Taylor, which was hugely praised by lots of people. I'm shortlisted for the Booker Prize, so by definition was greeted with, and I genuinely thought it was, I was astonished that it was even published. So, I mean, that's an example of a book that, that I just didn't think it was worth reading at all. But so yeah, I mean, but that's okay,
But I'm thinking, I don't know what you were thinking of, the man who asked the question. But I mean, have you read Ulysses?
I've read about 2/3 of Ulysses.
Right. Okay, that's good. But there are books that are considered classics. Well,
Yes.
what were you thinking
I was
of?
thinking primarily sort of dead authors,
Oh, yeah.
I know you talk about
Yeah.
Dickens and stuff. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm right with you.
Yeah.
Ulysses.
You're just.
I mean,
you say you're thinking of dead authors,
I know we're late on time here, but I mean, in terms of classics, I do like trying classics because they're, as Ezra Pound or someone said, they're news that stays new. So they're always, even if you don't like them, they're never quite what you expected, and classics get a reputation that get somewhat. I'm actually writing a piece about this at the minute, but they're slightly dusty and they're slightly daunting, and they've got black covers with old oil paintings on them, and you tend to think, oh, this is going to be good for you, rather than this is going to be a good read.
Yes.
And that's kind of off-putting. So I actually quite like finding out if that's true or not. And there's a lot of great sort of page-turners especially among 19th century sort of French novelists like Victor Hugo and Honoré Balzac. You're right, real sort of rip-roaring page-turners, much better than Dickens in my view.
What have
but-
you again, Wuthering Heights?
Oh, well, you know, that's actually, that's an answer to another of your questions, which is that I think, I read it about 20 years ago, I hated it, but I think I probably would not hate it now.
Yeah.
Because I've probably changed. I've probably read a lot of books in between that would
Yeah.
have changed my views. But I remember just finding it. I think it was actually the reputation of the book. Where I was expecting a love story, and anyone who's read Wuthering Heights knows.
Yeah.
Well, it's maybe nominally a love story, but it's actually
Yeah.
a very creepy, twisted, horrible story about ghosts and torture
Yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah.
So, so I think it was probably a matter of expectations not being met. So
They
if
were
I,
not
if I
great.
approached it,
Yep.
yeah, thank you. On that pun.
Boom, boom. I know, I always need to end with a pun. Thank you so much. That was
Thank you.
really, really interesting. Not that I thought it was going to be really, really boring. Gosh, I am so out of practice of this. I promise I'll be much better the next time. Thank you so much, John Self.
Thank you,
Your mum and
Marie-Louise.
dad pleased? He did okay, didn't he? Yes, getting a nod of approval from the back. Thank you to everybody who came here tonight, and thank you to everybody who is watching either live online or will be watching us at your leisure. It has been a real pleasure. Thank you to Tully Carnett Library and everybody for asking us. Thank you.
Thank you.